Have you been curious about getting into all grain brewing but are not sure where to start? Perhaps the process is just too overwhelming. Maybe you don't want to spend hundreds of dollars on expensive equipment. Well, this is the video for you. In this video, I'm going to show you a quick, easy, simple, cheap way to dip your toes in the water of all grain brewing and see how it goes. Let's get brewing. So let's start by talking about equipment. Where do we start? And probably the first, maybe most difficult, expensive thing to procure is one of these urns. You see here, I've got a crown urn. I've had it a long while. It's taken a few beatings, but it's great. It still goes well and it hasn't missed a beat. If you pick up an urn like this, it'll serve you well if you do go down the all grain rabbit hole. You'll be able to use something like this for a sparge water urn, a hot liquor tank. Even if you buy a more advanced all-in-one system or a 3-vessel setup down the track. But let's not go into that now. Let's start by saying if you purchase this, it won't be wasted in the future. You'll still be able to use it in different applications if your brewing setup grows. Now, in addition to your brew kettle, your urn, you're also going to want to buy one of these. It's a valve, a ball lock valve that you can open close to get the brew out of the kettle. This is probably the most important part. The good thing about these urns is they always come with a tap on the front to get the hot water out. That's not ideal, so one of these is perfect. Going to want one of these fittings, which is screw-in fittings, so grab one of them, and these are camlock fittings. So this is going to go on, connect together, and this is attached to a silicone hose so that we can drop that into our vessel later on. If we have a look inside, we've got a concealed element down the bottom, which is important, and that little thing there is your temperature control. You want to keep them clean so that they can do a good job for you and your brewing. So we need something else, because if we put our grain in our bag on the bottom of this concealed element, we're going to get scorching. That stuff is going to burn. So we need a specific strain or a tool for this purpose. Here's one I bought when I bought this urn years ago. And the idea is this will go down in the bottom, cover the element to keep the grain bag from touching the element and scorching. So I'll go ahead, I'll put that inside. And now we're ready to fill her up with water. Now, I've selected an urn that's 40 litres in capacity, which is a pretty good size for most brews. Don't get anything smaller than that. For this brew, I'm going to add 31 litres of non-chlorinated water. Now, I'm not going to talk much about water, but whatever you do, make sure there's no chlorine in that, or chloramines. I did another video on how I had troubles with these things in my beer and how they wrecked it, so don't make the same mistake as me. Make sure that you deal with that before you use your water. You might want to use a filter if you've got one of them at home, or adding some sodium metabisulfite or Campton tablets if you have them laying around, or even vitamin C can help drop these nasty chemicals out of your water. If you're unsure, check with your home brew shop and ask them for some advice. Once we've added our 31 litres of water to our fermenting vessel, we set the temperature to 70 degrees Celsius. Now while we're waiting for that to heat up, I'll show you our bag that we're going to brew with. You can pick these up at the homebrew stores. They've got stitching Some people, before these were invented, some people used to use pillowcases. But what I'm going to do with that, I'm going to put this stitching on the outside. I'm going to put that inside my brew kettle before the water warms up. This will hold my grains inside and won't allow them to go everywhere and to make a mess when I'm brewing. If you're going to add your brewing salts at this stage, if you're not sure what this is about, don't worry about it. I'm not going into it in this video because I'm just concentrating on the grain process, but there's plenty of other videos, tutorials out there online, some from Hendo, and I think Gash from the Homebrew Network has started doing some tutorials on water chemistry, so check those out if you're interested. Okay, so we have here 4 kilos of Golden Promise. These are the grains before we put them through the mill. The mill basically just cracks the husk and it'll break these open, so I'll show you what it looks like once I put it through the mill. If you're just giving all grain brewing a go yourself, you're not going to get a mill and all this equipment. Just ask the home brew shop to mill the grain for you and it'll come cracked, ready to go to put straight in your bag inside your kettle. Actually, for those who are watching this as it's released, it's almost Australia Day. So for this brew, I've tried to make it an Australian theme. Brew in the bag is an Australian invention, and the no-chill method, which we're also going to use in this recipe, is another great Australian brewing invention. In fact, if you're watching this on a phone, iPad, maybe even TV right now and you're using Wi-Fi, that's another great Australian invention. So shout out to the Australian inventors. We are using the Hoppy Days Superblend, which is grown in Riverina in New South Wales from Voyager Malts. And we're also going to be using Australian Cascade in this beer. So everything about this beer, from the ingredients through to the technique, is Aussie. And if you follow this technique and recipe, you're going to end up with a crushable beer perfect for the Australian summer. Alright, so now that I've put that through the mill, you can see these grains have been cracked. It's a little bit like flour, and that's really what you're trying to produce. You're trying to get the flour out of the grain. In all grain brewing, sometimes we try to preserve these husks, the outer shell of the grain, to help the mash go through so that it doesn't get stuck. But in brewing a bag, not important. It doesn't matter in the technique we're using this today. So you can mill this stuff as fine as you want to get flour. In fact, with brewing a bag, that's usually the way to go to get as much of this flour as you want, because you don't need these husks. Next, we're going to add our grain to the water. Once it's at temperature, it must be at temperature at 70 degrees. We'll talk about that later. But there's a little bit of a knack to adding this grain. You want to add it slowly, piece by piece, and give it a good stir as you go. If you're using one of those homebrew kits, you might have a plastic spoon. Don't use that, it'll melt. Get a proper metal spoon or a wooden spoon from your local homebrew shop. You're going to need it. The reason we want to add this slowly, carefully, with lots of stirring, is to avoid what we call dough balls. Clumps of grain and flour that stick together and don't let the water permeate. Add your grain slowly, stir a lot, and check the mash to see if you find any of these dough balls, and if you do get some, and you will sometimes, break them up. So we call this process of steeping grains in hot water the mash. And I don't know why, because you don't mash anything, but the idea is it's like making a cup of tea. Just as you put your tea leaves into hot water to extract all the flavor from your tea leaves, you're doing the same thing with your grains. The main difference is there's other reactions going on. I mentioned these enzymes inside the grains, and those enzymes are going to convert the flour inside the grain into simple sugars that your yeast can eat to produce alcohol. I mentioned the temperature range. There's also an ideal pH range. If you've got a pH meter, you can monitor your water to make sure that it's between that 5.2 to 5.6 range, and that will give you the best conversion of your starches into simple sugars. Traditionally, you do this for about an hour, but today we're just going to do half an hour, make it quick and simple. Now here's the tricky bit. We've finished our mash and we've got to get this bag and the grain out without wrecking ourselves. Now bear in mind, this gets really heavy. You've got the weight of the grain, which is 4 kilos, plus probably another 4 kilos of water. So I've got 8 kilos in there. The more grain you add, the heavier this gets. So sometimes it's easier to have a pulley up the top if you've got one of those, but because I'm trying to keep it simple, I'm trying to show you how to do this. Now you can see the liquid draining out of this. Sometimes it's good to have a little strainer to just sit it on, rest it on, to let that drain out. Just make sure it's all draining into your urn and not onto the floor. Once we've done that, crank our temperature up as high as it goes and we'll bring this work to a boil. We're going to add 10 grams of Aussie Cascade. We've overshot there. It's not much. 10 grams of Aussie Cascade at the 30-minute mark at the start of our boil. And another 30 grams at the 20-minute mark, which is basically boil out. Notice this is Australian Cascade because it's almost Australian Day. We're using Australian malt from Voyager with the Superblend, and we're using Aussie Cascade. I'm interested to see how this goes in a single hop beer. See what it tastes like. See if it tastes like American Cascade or it's different. Anyway, up the Aussies. Oi, oi, oi. Now as the temperature rises and we get towards the boil, you'll notice this stuff. We call that hot break on the top. Some people like to skim it out because it looks gross. Some people stir it back in. It doesn't really matter, I don't think, at the end of the day. That's been my experience, and I've heard others say exactly the same thing. But what you will find is, all this is denatured proteins from the grains, and you know, it looks a bit like egg whites because that's what it is. It's the same process when you boil an egg and the egg goes white. That's what's going on with the proteins. They're being denatured, and so you can stir that back in, you can scoop it off the top. It's up to you. It's your beer and your adventure. What you do have to be careful about though is for a boil over. So we'll keep a close eye on this, but you don't want to make it boil over and come over the top. You'll see. You can see it's starting to boil now. So we just want to keep these hot break, these proteins to the one side so that the water can boil. If we let it go over the whole thing, it'll bubble up and it can boil over the top. Now you can get a product from your local home brew shop that will stop that happening. I think it's like a silicone product, and apparently it helps head retention as well. I haven't ever used it. I haven't bothered, but that will stop this bubble up problem from happening. So it's a way to eliminate another problem from your beer. But for this beer, I haven't used it. If you're interested, ask your local home brew shop. Here we're coming up to a boil now. So we just need to keep on top of this. So that we don't get that boil over. And once we get a good vigorous boil, bubbles really bubbling up, we're getting close, but you'll see what I mean. Once it gets really vigorous and energetic, then we'll start adding our first hops. Now, boils can normally go for, traditionally, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, and there's reasons for that, but with the grains that we're using today, they're highly modified, which means we don't need to boil for quite as long. So we're going to do a 30-minute boil today, again, to keep this quick, simple, easy, and fun. All right, now we're on a good, vigorous rolling boil. I'm going to set a timer for 20 minutes. When that timer goes, we're going to add our first hop addition, the 10 grams of Cascade. Okay, our 20 minutes is up, so in with our 10 grams of hops, and I'm going to add a Werflock tablet because we've only got 10 minutes of boil to go, so I'm going to drop that in. Werflock is a kettle fining agent. It'll drop out some of the chill haze proteins that are created in the beer. So we drop some of that out and leave them behind in the kettle when we transfer. That's the idea. The timings are a bit different when we do this no chill method. So we don't chill the beer down straight away, so a bit of bittering keeps going. So we adjust our boil timings accordingly. In the end, what you end up doing is adding 20 minutes on to what you do in the kettle. So the 30-minute boil becomes a 10-minute boil because it's going to get an extra 20 minutes inside the bag while it's cooling down. So we've just got 10 minutes to boil. I'm going to set my timer for another 10 minutes. Start. And in 10 minutes we'll add the next hop addition, turn the power off, let it sit and for a couple of seconds, and then we'll transfer it into our cube, or as I'm doing, into my bag. All right. Now I say bag because today I'm using one of these goon bags that you can get from Kegland or most local homebrew shops. They've been treated to make sure they're sterile. And when you're ready, you just lift the top off, and I'll show you when we fill that up later. The other option is to use a cube. These are single use. I guess you could use them again if you wanted to, but these are designed and priced to be single use. Use them once, throw them away. So if you want to use these, you can. They're a bit trickier to use because they don't hold their shape. You can get burnt easily if you don't pay attention to what's going on. So I'd recommend that you grab a cube from your local homebrew store, or maybe the plastic people online. You can pick up one of these. You've got to make sure it's food safe, it's high density polyethylene, and I'd recommend using that, especially if it's your first time. Okay, so that's the end of our 30-minute boil. So we're going to add the last of our hops, and we'll kill the power. Turn your urn off, stop the boil. Sit in. Those hops, as you can see, pretty well dissolve straight away. And now what we're going to do is we're going to transfer this liquid into our bag or cube. Now, remember, safety first. I'm going to use some heat gloves. Even better if you can get a set that is waterproof as well. Because remember, you're dealing with boiling water here. This is not fun when you get it on you, so be smart and be safe. All right, let's do this. Same process whether you've got a cube or a bag like me. You're just going to take the lid off, put that aside, pop your silicone tube in, put it down to the bottom. And then once you've got that in, you can open your ball lock valve and let the liquid flow. Now, part of the whole point of this process is you're transferring boiling hot liquid. It's going to sanitize this bag, although this one's already, but if you're using a cube, it mightn't be 100% sterile. Well, it won't be, so the heat will help kill any remaining bugs in the vessel. Now, I'm using the bag. What's the advantage of this? The advantage is it's single use. You don't have to worry about cleaning, sterilize, keeping it clean. But that's where the advantages end. With a cube, you're going to have to clean it afterwards, clean it well, rinse it and dry it, and make sure you maintain it mold free. That's the disadvantage to a cube, but the advantage to a cube is much easier to work. See how I'm having to hold this up? The bag doesn't keep its shape. It's much easier to burn yourself, whereas a cube, you can just drop that in, turn the tap on and walk away. So it's much safer, much easier to use. I'd recommend a cube, especially if you're not familiar with this. I prefer working with a cube. I just don't have a cube. I've got this, so here I am. While I'm filling up this bag, I might tell you that I ended up fermenting this beer with BRY 97 from Lallemand, which has some good biotransformation properties, which means, in simple terms, it'll give you a good fruity beer. You'll get the best out of your hops. But by all means, you can choose your favourite ale yeast or even lager yeast. And you may even choose an Australian strain like the Australian Cooper's Sparkling strain, or the Melbourne Ale strain if you really want to stick with the Australian made theme. The choice is yours. And leave that to chill. G'day brewers, we're back, and there she is. Look at that, beautiful yellow with a slight apricot tinge to it, nice white head. It's still quite cloudy because it hasn't had any conditioning time and I haven't added any findings. We've just stuck with a simple method, quick and easy so far. So if you want it clear, you can wait, you can add some gelatin or findings, but I haven't. So let's jump in and have a look. Aroma first. Yeah, I'm getting that nice citrus, grapefruit aroma that's classical American Cascade. So far, pretty similar. Let's dive in and have a taste. Okay, so again, on the palate, we get the same thing, that citrus, grapefruit, a bit of floral, and a little bit of pine on the back end with the hops. The mouth feels quite nice. It's soft, but it's got this lingering, firm bitterness. The malt character is subdued. It does just enough and adds just enough malt sweetness to lift the hops and to keep the beer nice and crushable. So if that's what you're after a nice crushable beer this Australia Day, then cheers. Or perhaps you might want to try an American Pale Ale, and if so, check out this video which goes through my recipe on how to make your best American Pale Ale.